Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM Podcast.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on a day crammed full of F1 goodness. The season is near. Everyone's getting their machinery out and slapping it on the table. The teams have still got their secrets and mind games going on. But silly season is fading away, Shane, and very soon the rubber will, both literally and metaphorically, have to hit the road.
I can't wait.
You know, for all their foibles, I must admit I really love watching these car reveals. And I don't think I've paid them quite as much attention in previous years. Do you think doing it with RPM like this has changed the way that you've watched all of these reveals?
I think I've consciously had to watch them. So in previous years, I would have just looked on Twitter and gone, there's a nice livery. Oh, that's pretty cool. That looks nice. I'll see it on track in a couple of weeks' time. But now I'm watching every single stream live if I can. And I'm taking a lot more from it, and I'm enjoying them a lot more.
Yeah, I'm kind of very similar, really. I just ended up watching little bits here and there, and I would usually watch, obviously I watched the McLaren one and see what they were doing, and yeah, I've not really then been that engaged in it until now, and it's changed the way that I've looked at it completely. So without further ado, let's get into it with the launch of the Mercedes W12.
So, like you said, the champions have returned to our screens once again with Toto Wolff, Valtteri Bottas, and Lewis Hamilton and the Mercedes W12. I quite like this launch. It's very well structured, very professional, very clean, very crisp. Just everything went to plan. It was a very typical Mercedes launch. However, some things were different, and we'll go into that throughout this podcast. But initial thoughts, I really, really like how it went. It was one of my favourite launches because of how well structured it was. Your opinions?
Yeah, I thinking about Mercedes coming into this season, the closer we get, I kind of get a bit more questioning about how definite their victory might be this year coming into it as the champions. But surely nothing can stop this team. It doesn't look like anything's changed. Looking at this production, like you say, very slick. As has been observed by others before and talked about by Toto Wolff himself, what makes Mercedes so good is something that can't really be copied, which is like the management and the leadership and hiring the right people and this sort of god tier level management and leadership. And it's why they've dominated, and it's one of the great things about Formula One, what it takes to be a successful team. So seeing this very slick production, like you mentioned, lots of smooth, slow moving camera movements in a simple interview situation, no pomp, no flash. They were just in the factory.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mercedes, even their launch interviews are amazing.
Yeah,
they know how to put it together.
It made me feel like I was ready for another F1 season. The championship contenders had returned, and as much as there wasn't very much hype, they keep it very settled. They keep it very calm, cool, and professional from both drivers and Toto himself. I kind of felt deep down that these guys were ready to throw everything at 2021. This isn't just a rinse and repeat of 2020. This is a brand new season with new regulations, and Mercedes mean business because they weren't all forthcoming in the launch. For the eagle eyes amongst you, there was a lot of camera work. The camera was panning around the car, showing us different angles, showing us different parts of the car, but it wasn't all to be true. The car was there, but all the new specs and all the new designs weren't on the car as expected. But they came out and they told us that they were open about hiding things, which I found very interesting. They told us some things were brand new, like the engine and the extra bulge on the engine cover, and obviously the floor itself.
James Allison talked about his sexy bulge, didn't he?
Honestly, James Allison,
sexy looking bulge.
I really enjoyed his. Post-race discussions last year about how each race has gone and the technical insights.
Yeah.
And bringing him on stage and talking about the development of the car. The guy is just a pleasure to listen to because he talks with so much passion. It's just enjoyable. But let's get back onto the program itself. The car was launched, had a quick promo video of the heritage of Mercedes. It was over and done with within 30 seconds. I thought it was nice, short and sweet. It wasn't very prolonged at all. And then we moved into a very well-lit studio kind of factory scene with the Mercedes W12 and the drivers and Toto. And we had a kind of an interview style launch. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Toto detailed this kind of constant skepticism of the team and their desire not to fall behind, which is kind of what the kind of narrative we've come to expect from Mercedes, where they tend to play down their chances and they tend to talk about how we're just focused on doing the best that we can and we're not taking anything for granted. And that is very much a winner's attitude as demonstrated by their success. It's quite cleverly put together, though, because it makes Toto look like he's on the receiving end of all these difficult questions. But I find it very hard to believe that Mercedes haven't, as they pretty consistently do, very carefully compose and orchestrate the action exactly. So I get the impression that Toto knew what was coming, but they played it very, very cleverly to maintain that narrative of we're not afraid of the difficult questions. We're not, getting our head up our asses. We're being serious about our chances.
He had a perfect and reasonable response to every single question without any hesitation, which makes your theory, which it's not really a theory, it's pretty much true. That would have been a scripted interview.
Yeah, well, also at the end, he looked like he was asked to do something that was unscripted. We had to speak to the camera, and remember when he said, "Oh, you'll have to tell me which camera it is." That bit obviously wasn't scripted. You could tell because it was so different to everything else. So I don't know. That's my theory. I think that all of that was just they knew exactly what was going on. We should also say that there was a mention of COVID. We've been kind of keeping track of which teams mention COVID and which ones don't. But yeah, they did talk about it. They talked about the having to deal with it and Toto having caught it and how that was. And then, we had the promo video that you mentioned that was like a sort of very expensive AMG advert, basically promoting the hyper performance of the brand. And then, we had a very clear look at the car. If we just move on to some of the technical stuff, there was quite a lot of slow camera movement as we were chatting to the drivers, and we could really see the car very clearly. It wasn't like snapping around quick cuts. It was, here it is, take a good look. But they did have that sheath over the floor so that you couldn't see exactly what they had done. And James Allison talked about how, obviously, all the usual, we've tightened the rear end and tweaked the diffuser and all this stuff that basically is meeting the regulations and responding to the regulations that most teams are doing. But there seems to be a little bit of uncertainty over whether the rear-centric changes in the regulations will affect Mercedes' low-rake design and the way that they have sorted out their car. And they've presumably responded to that with what they've done with their floor. But as you mentioned, they've covered it up. They don't want anybody to be able to see it. And they're honest with the fact that they've done something that they perhaps don't want other teams to copy.
I think when you're as much of F1 fans as we are, the camera was panning and I was looking at the different angles of the car. I was writing down things which we could talk about on the podcast, and then I saw the floor and I was like, well, that doesn't look right at all.
Looks a bit plain.
That's just a sheet of metal. Like, there's no technical innovation going on there. And I was like, they've hit it. I mean, they haven't hit it like Red Bull have done and had loads of flashes and different weird angles and not actually released any photos of their brand new car at all. They've just hit it by putting on a very plain floor, which I said to my other half. I was like, that's not the right floor. That is a complete cop-out. They're trying to hide something. And then, lo and behold, 2 minutes later, James Allison was like, yes, we're very proud of what we've done, and we're not showing anyone until Bahrain, at least. So I thought that was very well done. It gets me excited for Formula One, not because Mercedes could get any further ahead. I mean, Mercedes are so dominant. Them being dominant shouldn't be a bad thing. I just want to point that out. It's just a fantastic insight of what a team can achieve with the sport. I think it's amazing what Mercedes have done over the last couple of years, and I think other teams need to catch up. We've talked about that in the past. But the fact that they're still striving to innovate and to produce new parts at the end of what will be a massive technical regulation change is just amazing. I think fair play to them. They're not letting their guard down. They're not just going to try and copy last year. They're going out for the win once again.
They've got the money and the resources, so you'd think they would go for it if they could do. Just before we go on more about the technical stuff, just to touch a little bit on the launch a little bit more, let's talk about when they were chatting with the drivers. So, whilst we were looking at the car and obviously was doing those slow camera angles and checking out the floor like you mentioned, we were having a little interview with first with Bottas, and we had Valtteri answering some questions about, what's it like to be Hamilton's teammate, and he was playing up his self-honesty and pushing to be the best that he could be. And again, it shows how Mercedes do business in that they tend to lean into the kind of questions that other people or journalists, other team might be able to use against them to put on pressure. So they're straight up going with the, well, how do you deal with the pressure of having Lewis Hamilton as your teammate? And they're not trying to hide away from that sort of thing. So that's encouraging to see. I'm glad that they're not trying to paste over that. It's very clear that Bottas has been under a lot of pressure to match up against Lewis Hamilton, of all people, Sir Lewis Hamilton as he is now.
Yeah,
so
which they mentioned a couple of times.
yeah, so that was interesting, and they talked with Hamilton, who talked a little bit about opportunity in the sport, and obviously he's wanting to push to use his platform to talk about opportunity and diversity and the like. And it's the 15th year in Formula One.
Yeah.
Lewis Hamilton, 15 years. He kind of played down the fact that he only had a 1-year contract, said that he's achieved much of what he wants to already, which makes sense. So it's still not clear what will happen after this year, but yeah, he was very honest about it.
Yeah, I can't help but feel I was expecting a little bit more excitement, a little bit more thrill from the drivers. We got a little bit from Bottas and his desire to like get in and drive the car and show what he can do.
They were both quite stoic, weren't they?
Hamilton was very reserved, and it was kind of like a reserved launch across the whole kind of, everyone involved. But like you said, Hamilton to come around and say, I've achieved everything I ever wanted to achieve. There's only a handful of people who've been able to do that in Formula One. And maybe this is his way of saying, I don't really mind what happens over the next couple of years. I've done everything I set out to do. He's matched Michael Schumacher and he's done a go for his 8th. But when he was questioned about his 8th title, he changed his response to maybe not prioritizing driving, but looking at the diversity amongst the Mercedes. They have a massive campaign going forward that in their organization, for every 4 people they hire, one person has to come from like an ethnic minority or like an underprivileged background. Okay. Part of their new 25%, I can't remember what the slogan is. It's on the halo and it's bugging me that I can't remember what it says. But he's pushing for, equal opportunities and that brilliant agenda almost more than his racing. But we know Hamilton, he can get into a car on a bad weekend and still perform. So maybe that's me saying that he's got a bit of a split agenda, which is absolutely fine. I'm not saying you can't do more than one thing. But it was just interesting how he answered a question about his 8th title with something which is involved in the team, something outside of racing, I just found it very interesting.
Yeah, he's mentioned before that he considers it a good platform to say what he wants to say and use it to project his voice in that regard, and he does it very well because obviously he performs so well that you can't help but pay attention to him. So yeah, he's doing a good job in getting that message heard. Yeah, let's move on to the technical aspects then. We've already mentioned them not really wanting to show their flaw. We've been in this situation before where Mercedes haven't revealed all to us, though, because they've also not revealed how they're spending their development tokens.
Yeah.
Understandable secrecy. Nobody knew about DAS until they revealed it at testing last season. I mean, that was one of the main moments of the season. I remember starting off as they just turned up and, oh yeah, we can move the wheel forward and back to adjust the toe. And everyone seemed to be caught pretty by surprise about that.
Everyone, if there was a great pan of the garages and everyone was just watching the Mercedes feed across all of the other 9 teams, they were just tuned into, I think it was Bottas who did it first, pulled that steering wheel back on the Spanish straight, and everyone was just like, oh my, what have Mercedes done? And, them hiding the floor kind of gives me that kind of vibe again that they've done something so special and unique and they've innovated something completely different. I'm not saying they're going to flap up the floor or anything like that, but it's a remarkable team and they do some great things. So I'm excited to see what testing we'll get out of them.
I discovered something interesting about the DAS system from what happened with the debacle of it last year. I read an interesting article on Drive Tribe by, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, it was written by someone called Stijn Paspont. I think that's pronounced. I think that's a Dutch name, but apologies if that's pronounced incorrectly. They were talking about the details around DAS and from a regulations perspective. And Mercedes had essentially worked around the rules to innovate. But the FIA actually knew about DAS before the other teams or the fans did.
Oh.
Did you hear about this?
It rings a bell that the FIA knew it was happening.
So up to the 2020 season, the FIA could only bring in rule changes mid-season with the agreement of all the teams. And that's not the case in 2021 because they've changed it where they can make changes to the rules, for example, in response to teams finding loopholes, like with DAS. So this appears to be that change in the regulations was a direct response to Mercedes and DAS because Article 10.5.2, I think it is, of the technical regulations, which basically says you can only move the wheels by turning the steering wheel to the left or the right. It was added 4 months before the reveal of DAS when the 2021 regulations were released, which kind of proves that they already knew about it and did everything they could to stop it. So here we are in 2021 with DAS now banned. How do you feel about the ban of DAS?
I don't know how much they used it in 2020. I don't think they used it too often.
Didn't seem to be a massive deal, did it?
No, I think it's good to equalise the sport, to bring everyone together, but also it's a shame that something which has no doubtably had hundreds and hundreds of hours worked on, and they've created this brand new system. And again, it was all about the innovation of technology, that it was just banned. It was just gone. In past times, it would have been up to other teams to upskill and almost copy or, try and do what Mercedes have done to equalize the playing field. But at this time, it was just, nope, you're not Mercedes. You're too far ahead. We're going to ban you. It begs the questions. What happens if Williams turns up and had DAS? Would it be up to every other team to equalize it because Williams are at the back of the grid, or would it have been banned?
Yeah, that'd be a different tale, wouldn't it? With something like this dual axis steering, I can understand why something that involves the driver changing something about the car whilst it's racing, something you're more likely to ban. Because the first instinct, I think, is if someone has risen to a technical challenge and use that to innovate on their car and produce a better car, that should be encouraged. That's what you want in Formula One. But I can see why something that involves the driver changing some aspect of the setup of the car, I can see why you might want to ban something like that. So I have slightly conflicted feelings about it. But yeah, so no DAS this year, which probably saves them some weight, I would have thought, as well.
And they can put that weight somewhere else.
Yeah, so it's probably not all bad news for them. Anything else to add technical-wise then?
No, obviously they talked about, I don't know why I said no, and I'm going to talk about something else, but they talked about the engine being developed and the engine bay being slightly bigger. There being a bulge to fit in more components and stuff.
Yeah, just want to mention James Allison's sexy-looking bulge again. He did mention that. Just want to make sure that we mention that again.
I'm definitely going to clip that. But yeah, they've done stuff to the engine. Mercedes weren't invincible last year. They did have some gremlins, especially in testing. So hopefully they've ironed it out. They also mentioned how they've maybe focused on how they can preserve their car longer this year. With the cost cap coming in, you can't just replace parts every time you need to. You've got to be sensible with your money and how your car wears and tears over a weekend. So they've spent a lot of time looking at how to preserve their car through a race weekend and how they can get more out of it without, without costing too much, which I thought was interesting. And a team like Mercedes, who are pretty much ahead of the game anyway, can now explore different areas of their car, like preserving parts for different races.
Well, let's talk about the livery then. Now, the renders were what we saw first. They came just before the actual program itself. Now, these renders are not particularly great quality, I didn't think, compared to some teams. The render made the red, for example, look quite bright. It made it look horrible, actually. When I first saw it in the image, I was a bit, ugh, what is this bright red that you've put on the car? But it doesn't really look like that in when we saw it in the video. It looked more like it was last year, a sort of darker red. I was wondering if that underbody lighting was going to be part of the new car as well. Like there's going to be like Need for Speed or something where you can put body lighting kits on your car.
Can you imagine through the streets of Singapore?
They should all do that. All the teams should do that, and they should have their team color as the underbody light.
Brilliant. Street
racing style.
That would attract new fans. Problem solved.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so looking at the livery as it is, then I like the change on the front wing. They have that teal color. that's been a bit more of a blob rather than just the lines that they did have on the front wing. They've obviously added that onto the top of the halo as well, where it was just all black before. The biggest talking point is probably the AMG stickering, which is which from the side view, it is a little bit crude. It makes the side view look less clean and less almost militaristic, like the W11 did. But really, the W12 is not that different, really. I mean, from the front view, it's almost identical. And it looks great. I really like that front view. It looks really mean. But yeah, from the side on, it doesn't quite land quite as well. That AMG stickering doesn't really come together to make anything. It doesn't. When they had the stars on it, it was like a texture. Kind of patterned and textured the rear of the car, whereas now it's just a bunch of AMG, 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 AMG. It doesn't come together to make anything like a shape or an idea. It feels like an afterthought.
Yeah, so I put a poll on Twitter at RacePerMinute and asked people what they thought about the car, whether they preferred this year's or last year's, and I've just checked the results. And we're actually at a bit of a Brexit situation. We're at 51%, I think.
You said it. You said the B word.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's 2021. I have to say it. But 48.9% love it and 51.1% thought last year's was better. So actually,
if this
pretty
is a
even.
Brexit-like situation, doesn't that mean we now have to destroy... then we have to destroy the car, right? We have to completely destroy the car because 51% of them liked it.
And do nothing about it for 3 years.
Yeah.
So moving on. This is not a political podcast. So yeah, pretty even. I thought that would have gone one way. I thought they would have sided with me. And I'm not a massive fan of the car and the new design. If you look at the car sideways on, and I'm glad you've got another side photo so you can get a decent thumbnail this time.
Yeah,
and
just bringing up my pictures here.
And it's all uniform. From the cockpit to the front of the car, I think looks fantastic. I really like the detail. I love the lines. I love the Patronus green. Sponsors look very neat, very tidy. And then you go from the cockpit to the back of the car, and I just don't like it.
Yeah, it falls apart a bit, doesn't it?
It just doesn't feel unified at all. Mercedes have some amazing designs. You go, from 2015 all the way through. They've had the silver arrows, which looks so good, and they've introduced this black livery, which looks amazing last year. It took the sport by storm. Like this black livery, it was so dominant, and it just looked amazing. They had the stars, which brought in the silver. They had the red star for Niki Lauda. It just looked incredible. I think arguably one of the best looking cars on the grid. I know you probably disagree with that. We've talked about that in previous podcasts, but it was a very good looking car nevertheless. Now this year, I know they wanted to bring back a little bit of silver because they are the silver arrows, but it just doesn't do it for me. AMG, 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 AMG. Where's the uniform? Where's the consistency? Where's the professionalism? I don't understand who done that. And why? Because I think it looks awful. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm looking at the renders now, and the renders look a little bit worse. Well, the renders do look worse than what we saw on the live stream on the launch. And I'm glad that the launch car does look as good as it does. Like I said, the front of the car and where it says Patronus on the side looks absolutely fantastic. But even on the launch video, if you go around to the rear of it, it just doesn't look very good at all.
It's not so much of an issue with the fact that it is obviously advertising that AMG stuff quite heavily. It's their company, their brand. They can advertise it as much as they like, but it's the fact that it's just not done in a very sleek fashion. It's just very crude. It's just repeating AMG all over the back of the car. It doesn't come to form anything. And but otherwise, the rest of it is pretty much exactly the same.
I think I've spoken in podcasts before how I like the Mercedes livery because it's got very few sponsors on, very few but select sponsors on. So they have massive black spaces. They can have huge, green strips on the side, and it doesn't look too imposing. And then he just got this really busy, unclean rear. And it's just they kind of just moved away from what I thought was their normal livery. But that's just my opinion, and I'm happy to say 49% of people would agree with me. So maybe it's the 49% of people looking at the back of the car and not the front.
Yeah, I do wish they'd bring back the lightsaber-like glow that they had on the stripes, on the coloured stripes. They had back in, 2017, I think they would have last have it. Kind of liked that. I wish they'd bring it back for the black liveried car as well. But other than that, yeah, the rest of it is very similar. And as you say, Mercedes being Mercedes, they can afford to have quite a clean look. They don't need to plaster their car with sponsors. So it's, yeah, we expected something maybe a little bit cleaner, a little bit even meaner and even cleaner than the W11.
Yeah.
And not really. It feels like a slightly messier little brother to the W11.
So there we have it, the Mercedes W12 launch reaction from RacePerMinute. What do you think of the livery? Have we missed anything? Send us your thoughts and questions at RacePerMinute on Twitter, or get in touch with us at RacePerMinute.com. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like rating. And if you like what we do, please consider subscribing to RacePerMinute wherever you get the podcast. And if you really want to support the show and help keep us produce the quality and receive some lovely rewards, you can donate to us by as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/RacePerMinute. That's all from us, and we'll see you next time, which will be the Alpine launch on the same day.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very close. So shortly after this one, we'll have a little chat about Alpine.
Stay tuned.